My dear brothers, I hope you are well. I look forward to us being able to have our L'chaims and our Shir. Truth is, I look forward to having it in person, but until then, to have our Zoom in real time. But I did want to share with you a thought, a down-to-earth thought that deals with the time that we're in between Pesach and Shavuot, and maybe share a few take-home insights that will be helpful to you. This time between Pesach and Shavuot is called Sfirat Omer, the counting of the Omer. The Omer offering, the Omer is actually a measurement that was actually given, the Jewish people gave it on the second day of Pesach, and it was really a bundle, not a very large amount. I think it's about 43 eggs, the volume of 43 eggs of fine barley. And the next korban was given at the time of Shavuot, when the Jewish people received the Torah, and that was 2 loaves of wheat. And in the middle of those times is the counting, what we call Sfirat Omer, the 7-week cycle. And traditionally, it was actually a very joyous time. It's a time of personal reflection. It's a time of personal growth. The Jewish people are becoming more refined, stepping out of an Egyptian slave mentality and learning what it means to be an individual who serves God, an individual who's also part of the people. But later on in Jewish history, this time was tainted and becomes actually a time of mourning, in large part because of a story that we're told about Rabbi Akiva and his students. There's a lot of irony involved in this. But during the temple times, actually after the destruction of the Second Temple, which was in 70 CE, about 1,951 years ago, Rabbi Akiva was the Gadol Hador. He was the giant of his generation. And at that time, he built an academy. Mind you, he was probably, if you work it out, probably in his 60s when he actually built this academy, in his mid-60s when he first built his yeshiva. And he was also the epitome of the concept of V'ahavta l'recha kamocha. He's the one that said, Ze klal gadol b'Torah, the idea of loving another as you love yourself, and that being the overarching theme of the Torah is something that Rabbi Akiva very much lived by. And the irony is that at that time he had 24,000 students. Now imagine the potential of 24,000 Torah giants on the world. But we're told that over time, as the Talmud tells us, lo natnu kavod zelazeh, they failed to give each other proper kavod. Now we need to understand, it's not like you and I not giving each other proper respect. These are Torah giants, and therefore there's an expectation in their behavior, which Hashem measures much more critically than he would with you and me. And at that time, these 24,000 students perished. And Rabbi Akiva had to start his yeshiva again with 5 students. And from those 5 students, we have Torah 2 millennia later. So just imagine the potential. But at the same time, Hashem, for a very important reason, didn't want the Torah to come from those 24,000 students. And maybe let's take a little look at that opportunity and see how it ties in historically to Sfirat Omer. Rabbi Akiva's students, the Gemara actually alludes to them. It doesn't say that he had 24,000 students. It said he had 12,000 pairs of students. And there's a message in that. And that is for Torah transmission, for Torah to be really true, it needs to be done in partnership. I need to be able to sit down and learn with someone and to be able to confront them and to argue with them and to debate with them for the sake of finding truth. It's not something that I do on my own, because then my own biases and my lack of being able to be critical of myself in terms of making sure that I understand things correctly doesn't really exist when I'm learning alone. But when I'm learning b'chavruta, when I'm learning in partnership, it's actually very powerful. At the same time, partnership has its challenges. And this we see historically. We've always had to have this balance of the individual and the community. And that balance we're still trying to get right 2 millennia later. The truth is, it's actually more than 2 millennia later. That balance of being able to take care of myself while also being mindful of the surroundings and people that Hashem has put in my life. So what happened? How could it be that you have these Torah giants that overlooked giving each other kavod? And the sages tell us the following concept. When we are learning, when we're learning Torah, when we're trying to embrace the truths of Torah, first and foremost, we're trying to refine ourselves. At the same time, while we're refining ourselves, there's still a battle. There's still the Yetzer Hara that gives you messages that you'll listen to while you're learning Torah. One of the messages that our evil inclination or our selfish inclination tell us is that you're becoming a Torah giant. You can become a force. You can become the greatest. And that's not all bad, but what goes on with that, there's like an undercurrent of you're better and that it's a zero-sum game. And that can actually come up when we start to realize that my Torah is for me to grow myself and also to share. One of the challenges that the students of Rabbi Akiva had was you start learning with someone, you start having a relationship with someone, and it can get very fiery. But over the course of time, you can actually grow so close that it's maybe even too close for comfort. What do I mean by that? And that is, there's a closeness there that makes us realize that, wait a second, I'm actually growing very comfortable with this person to the point that I'm not really seeing the difference between he or she and I. And that is, there's a healthy part of that, but the price tag of it is sometimes in our relationships, we make a lot of assumptions. And we can also drop details, those little gestures that remind me that you are you and I am me. And we still need to live together and function together and love each other, but I'm still me and you're still you. And because I am me and you are you, that's why I value you. That's why I cherish you. We see that in many human interactions and human relationships and close relationships especially, is that sometimes we kind of drop the details. Like once the honeymoon is over, so we're not buying flowers every single week. We're not greeting with a smile. We're not maybe even taking care of ourselves as well because we're in it. We're together. We're BFFs. We're all cool. And the consequence of that is that I don't see your own Tselem Elokim. I don't see how your godliness actually complements my godliness. And when we start going into too much of all of us being very, very close, we start to not worry about the relationship because, we're tight. We're tight. I think we've alluded to this idea in other times throughout the year because it is a pattern. It's a pattern that we have that when we think that we're too close and too connected, we can become lax. And that also happens in our relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu, with the Almighty. We're good. Hey, I'm a good Jew. I'm keeping Shabbos. I keep kosher. I make the blessings. I'm doing good stuff. I'm not stealing. I'm not murdering. Come on, I'm a good guy. And therefore, I don't need to really improve that much because I see myself as being safe. We're good. There's no major issues going on. Sfiras HaOmer is about kind of stepping back and making sure we have the priorities and the balance. See, the Jewish people came out of Mitzrayim and they had to work their way back up. Granted, they had a few critical components to keep their identity, but in terms of their spiritual level, they had to work every day of those 49 days to get to a point where they can actually see their greatest selves. So we work on our individuality during Sfiras HaOmer. The key is to do so in such a way that as I work on myself, I actually express or I behave towards others in a more refined manner also. So it is a lot of introspection. It is a lot of time to say, okay, am I being the best friend, the best husband, the best Jew, the best servant of God, the best community member? And is there room for growth? Is there room to actually be better? And I think that's one of the mindsets that we're supposed to have when it comes to our close relationships with our spouses, with our children. If we think that we're really tight, we can kind of relax on the details, and sometimes the flavor and the beauty and the mystery and the growth in the relationship tends to kind of get paused. It just goes on autopilot. But if we have the mindset that I'm not as close as I think I am to you, or I'm not as close as I want to be, to make sure to fuel our relationship so that we're growing to our greatest potential. If I have that mindset, like you're going to go away tomorrow. I'm going to miss you. I can't always speak with you. There are times you're not available. It makes our time together that much more precious. And that is one concept that I think is very down to earth. Something they could really work on at home with, firstly, our nuclear family. I mean, firstly with ourselves, but then with our nuclear family, to approach people with a sense of wonderment, with a sense of reverence that you are a created being of God. You will have a Tselem Elokim, which complements me, but is not me. None of us are identical. None of us, as you say in England, are redundant, right? Every single person has unique contribution to make. Our time during Sfiras HaOmer, in order for me to accept Torah, in order for me to embrace Torah, I need to know that I have a special place. And during the course of our short lifetimes, relatively short lifetimes, we want to discover, what is my voice? What is my unique contribution? And that voice doesn't have to silence, or should not be silencing any other voices. It should be complementing it. And that's how we have this beautiful orchestra of the Jewish people approaching Har Sinai. And the challenge is even Har Sinai didn't put us into autopilot. It was really a one-off. The unity we had, I think we spoke about this last year on Shavuot, the unity we had was on that day. There was a lot more kvetching, a lot more quarrels, a lot more challenges right afterwards. So it's a constant daily workout that we have in making sure that our godliness, our neshama, is actually leading us, is actually the voice that we want to share with others. And when we do that, then I recognize my unique place, I recognize your unique place, and that Hashem says there's room for all of you. I need you all here to do something, to express a hue of godliness that no one else can express except you. That is one of our opportunities on Sfirat Omer, that every day counts, and there's so many beautiful resources online, and I actually have a flip chart with what goes into some of the mystics of every single day, what kind of a midah, what kind of an attribute to work on, and maybe we'll talk about that next week. In the meantime, I wish you a very beautiful Shabbat. It's Shabbat Mevarchim. It's Shabbat of blessing. It's also a Shabbat where there's a custom that people bake challahs either in the shape of a key, or they put a key inside and they bake it with the key inside, or they kind of jam or stick a key inside their challah as a good blessing for parnasa, a good blessing for sustenance, and we do that. That God should open up that door and give us the blessing and bounty, so that we don't take it for granted, so that we can continue to do good for ourselves and good for those around us. Have a beautiful Shabbos, and I look forward to seeing you all next week.